Before you embark on this gripping saga of buried secrets and an undeniable bond, remember to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and comment below with where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us share more compelling and heartwarming narratives. The Ring's Secret. A daughter's innocence unearths a buried truth. He just wanted to eat in peace. But when a little girl pointed to the ring on his finger and declared, "My mommy has one just like it," his world stopped. That ring was unique, custom-made. Only two existed. The second, he believed, had been buried with his wife 5 years ago. If this child was right, then the woman he had lost, the woman he had grieved, might be alive. How could a simple piece of jewelry shatter a man's reality and ignite a quest for a truth that was never supposed to be found? This is a story of a love thought lost, a family unknowingly fractured, and a past that violently reasserts itself. A fateful encounter. Arthur Vance didn't want to be seen. Not that night. His impeccably tailored suit remained folded on the back seat of his car, forgotten, like a costume that no longer fit. He wore dark jeans, a wrinkled black shirt, and simple unbranded sneakers. His face, always meticulously groomed for magazine covers, now sported the shadow of a thin, uncomfortable beard, an unconscious attempt to erase the identity the world knew. On that warm afternoon, he had driven aimlessly through London until the city began to dissolve into older, more human neighborhoods. Spotting the tiny restaurant with an aged facade, a crooked wooden sign that simply read, "The Corner Nook," he braked instinctively. A warm, yellowish light escaped through the steamed windows, and a smell, an impossible-to-ignore aroma, something between garlic browned in olive oil and freshly baked bread. Perhaps that was what he sought, or perhaps he was fleeing something he couldn't even name. He pushed the door with hesitation, as if crossing an invisible border. The bell above the entrance tinkled briefly, and no one looked at him, which at that moment was a rare relief. He sat near the window, his back to the street, and took a deep breath. The waitress brought the menu on folded paper, with few options and modest prices. He pointed thoughtlessly to the dish of the day, wishing simply to eat without being recognized, without anyone mentioning his Forbes covers, his hotel empire, the gala dinners with ministers and actresses. He wanted silence. He wanted a break from the version of himself they had constructed. The plate arrived in less than 15 minutes, lamb with mint sauce. The first bite did something strange to his breathing, as if the air in his chest had been pushed back by an invisible force. There was something in that seasoning, a memory. He ate slowly. The food brought more than flavor. It brought time. Fragmented images, intertwined with the aroma. A sunny terrace. Breezes. A forgotten glass of red wine on the windowsill. A soft, feminine voice saying, "More salt? Or is it perfect like this?" It was then he heard the sound of quick, light footsteps. He turned with the same naturalness of someone observing the movement around them. And there she was. A little girl. 4 years old, maybe 5. Dark curls, curious gaze. She held a colorful drawing in her hands, with childlike strokes and indecipherable scribbles. She stopped in front of him with the confidence of someone who doesn't yet know social embarrassment. She stared fixedly at his hand, then his face. "My mommy has one just like it." Her voice was crystal clear, light as wind on an apartment balcony. Arthur looked down, confused. He followed the girl's gaze and saw that she was pointing to the ring on his right ring finger, a thick silver band with a subtle spiral leaf engraving. Custom made. Only 2 in the world. One was here. The other, he believed, had been buried with Eleanor. His fork fell to the plate with a dull clink. How is your mommy's ring?" he asked, swallowing hard. "Just like this one," she said, touching his ring with her tiny finger. "And she wears it every day. She says she got it from a love that turned to smoke." Arthur swallowed hard. He wanted to ask more, but his tongue seemed tied. The girl smiled, proud of what she had said, as if she had revealed a beautiful secret. "What's your name?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "Sophia?" Time stood still. The light on the table seemed to dim. The air in the restaurant grew dense. "Sophia?" It was the name he and Eleanor had chosen for the daughter who was never born. A name he kept in silence, with reverence. A name he hadn't spoken aloud since the accident. Before he could react, a hurried waitress approached. "Excuse me, sir. She shouldn't be here. Sophia, come. You know you can't leave the kitchen." "But he has the ring, just like Mommy's." "I know, dear. But go back with Mommy, please. It's almost time for us to leave." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "Her mother? Is she in the kitchen?" "Yes, she's the chef, excuse the bother. She's very curious." "What's the chef's name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Eleanor Ruiz." The name fell like silent thunder in his mind. He slowly stood up, as if the ground were dissolving beneath his feet. The waitress looked at him, worried. "Are you all right, sir? Can I speak with her?" "The kitchen is closing, but I can see if she can come out." He nodded. He walked out of the restaurant without knowing why. Perhaps because he needed air. Perhaps because the walls seemed to close in on him. Outside, the night was warmer than before. The streetlights flickered between the leaves of the trees, and the sound of cars seemed to come from very far away. Eleanor. It was impossible. It was irrational. It was her. And Arthur Vance, a man of numbers, forecasts, and contracts, had a certainty no data could offer. Something much bigger than chance was moving at that moment. And he wasn't prepared. What is the significance of the unique ring and the name Sophia in this unexpected encounter? How do these details instantly shatter Arthur's reality and beliefs about his past? Share your thoughts below. A meeting from the ashes. Arthur's hands were cold, his jaw muscles clenched with tension. He didn't know if he felt rage, relief, confusion, or longing. And perhaps it was all of those at once. The city breathed around him, with its muffled sounds of cars and distant footsteps. But between him and that door, there was only silence. A screaming silence. The back door of the restaurant opened with a soft creak. Eleanor came out, her apron folded in her arms, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping from the sides. Her face was pale, aged by restless nights, but her eyes were the same. When she saw him, she stopped. Not like someone hesitating, but like someone who has been struck. Arthur took a step forward, but didn't speak. She looked around, as if checking if anyone was watching them, then looked back at him, directly, without hiding, but without the courage to approach. Why are you alive, Eleanor?" The question came out like a blade, dry, direct, irreversible. She didn't answer. She just looked down, as if searching for air. The air between them was dense. Arthur wanted to say more, but he didn't know what. Words seemed to betray him. "Listen to me, please," he pleaded, and his voice almost broke. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Without saying anything, she began to walk. Arthur followed her. They walked 2 blocks in silence. The neighborhood was old, with small buildings and shared courtyards. They entered a small, dark wooden door that led to a narrow hallway, and Eleanor opened the door to an apartment on the 2nd floor. The place was simple, with worn furniture and beige walls. A sofa with faded cushions, a small dining table with an empty fruit bowl. The smell of garlic and onion still lingered in the air, mixed with a soft lavender perfume that seemed to permeate the curtains. "Sit down," she said in a low voice. It wasn't an invitation. It was the reflection of someone who doesn't know where to start. Arthur sat on the sofa. Eleanor remained standing for a few seconds, then placed her apron on the chair and finally sat on a wicker armchair opposite him. "5 years," he said, staring at her. 5 years believing you were dead, that you had died burned, shattered, or that your body had been made to disappear. She took a deep breath. Her eyes shone, but she still held back. "I know." "No, you don't know," he replied, and there was pain in his voice. "I went through all the stages of grief, guilt, denial, rage, desperation. I buried you without a body, Eleanor. I bought an empty tomb because no one gave me answers." She closed her eyes for a second. "I wanted to protect you." "Protect me? By faking your death? Do you have any idea what that did to me? I had to disappear." The words came out in a whisper, and then she stood up. She walked to the kitchen, turned on the light, and took a wooden box from on top of the refrigerator. She returned with it in her hands and placed it on the table. "Arthur, it all began when Mark called me to review some contracts. He said you had signed a proposal without reviewing the annexes. It seemed strange to me. I took the documents, and I understood everything." She opened the box. Papers, clippings, photos, folders with marked names. They were using your signature to launder money off the company books. They traveled in your name. They made transactions with ghost accounts. You were the face, but you were surrounded by rats. Arthur skimmed the papers, his heart racing. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried. I sent messages. I called. I went to the company. The receptionist said you couldn't see me. Then I got a call." She paused. Her trembling hand rested on the papers. "An unknown number." The voice said, "You know too much, and your husband also knows. If you don't disappear, he'll disappear first." She looked him in the eyes, and in them there was something broken. "That night I came home. A car cut me off. I lost control. I went down a ravine. When I woke up, I was in a small clinic in the countryside. No one knew my name. No one recognized me." "Why didn't you call from the clinic?" His voice was now barely a thread. "Because the phone rang at night. It rang in the room, with no one on the other side. Veiled threats. They were following me. I saw it. I heard it. I couldn't risk it." She paused. Then she said, her voice broken, "So I died, because it was the only way to stay alive." Arthur brought a hand to his forehead. The weight of the revelations piled onto his shoulders. "And the girl?" Eleanor hesitated, then replied with a sigh. "Sophia. I discovered I was pregnant 3 months later. I was already in another state, hiding with a childhood friend. I didn't know if you were involved. I didn't know if you were still alive. I didn't know if I could trust anyone else." The phrase hurt more than he expected. "You thought I might be behind your death? I thought maybe you knew if you kept silent, or that they threatened you and silenced you. The world we lived in was dirty, and I no longer knew where you ended and where the men around you began." Arthur stood up. He walked to the window, opened it. The wind entered, bringing the smell of the night, the distant sound of a radio playing an old bolero on some floor below. "You let me bury you," he said, without turning his face. "You let me sink alone into hell. You let me break, Eleanor. I died with you. Only I had to keep breathing." He turned around. His eyes were moist, but there were no tears. "Do you think that's enough? That now, 5 years later, you can appear and hand me a dossier and a child? I didn't come to hand you anything. I didn't expect you to come into that restaurant. I cook there because it's the only place that doesn't ask questions. Sophia found your ring. It was fate's fault, or God's, or chance's, but not mine." She was crying now, in silence, not allowing herself to break down, only the tears falling, discreetly, as she maintained her composure. Arthur sat down again. "Sophia, that's the name we chose. I could never use another," she said, her voice broken. "It was the right name." He looked at her for long seconds. Then he whispered, "I want to see her again." Eleanor didn't respond immediately, but something in her face softened, as if an internal wall had given way, infinitesimally. "She falls asleep early, but tomorrow, if you want to stop by in the afternoon." Arthur nodded. He stood up, walked to the door. As he was about to leave, he turned around. "You died, but something in me also died with you, and now I don't know what we are." Eleanor didn't respond. He left. In the dark hallway, his breathing still ragged, Arthur Vance knew something with all the clarity in the world. The woman he loved was not dead, but perhaps the man he was. What is the most shocking revelation for Arthur in this conversation with Eleanor? How does Eleanor's decision to die to protect him and her pregnancy reflect the true dangers she faced? Share your insights below. A father's awakening. Arthur spent that night sleepless, lying in his enormous empty bed, staring at the ceiling as if it were possible to find some logic there, some meaning for everything that had crumbled. He had learned throughout his life to deal with calculable losses, stocks, contracts, investor confidence. But this was different. This was visceral. Eleanor was alive, and there was a child named Sophia. His daughter? The words still didn't fit well in his mind. My daughter. When he tried to repeat it aloud, it sounded false, not out of doubt, but out of disbelief. 5 years, an entire life. Lost, reinvented, hidden. Now, in front of him, was the opportunity to recover at least a fragment of what had been broken. And the truth came with a price. Everything he thought he knew about the past was stained by suspicion. Mark. The name emerged with weight. Trusted partner, right-hand man, best man at his wedding. The man who had supported Arthur in the hospital after Eleanor's supposed accident, who organized the symbolic funeral, who kept him standing when everything inside him screamed to collapse. Now, looking back, he saw signs. Small silences, changes of subject, disappearing contracts, trips made in his name. And he couldn't face it. Not yet. It was too soon. The next morning, he put on simple clothes, linen trousers and a light shirt, and returned to Eleanor's apartment. His hand hesitated before knocking on the door. When she opened it, she wore an old t-shirt, her hair loose and damp, and a gaze that mixed caution with something that seemed like relief. "She's drawing. Come in." Arthur entered silently. The living room was filled with small traces of a vibrant childhood. Toys in the corner, colored pencils on the table, a school backpack leaning against the wall. On the rug, Sophia, leaning over a sheet of paper, drew something that looked like a crooked castle with many windows. "Hello," he said, crouching beside her. She looked up, an instant smile appearing. "You're the ring man." "Yes, that's me. Can I see your drawing?" She showed it, animated. "It's the place where I live in my head." Arthur swallowed his emotion. The girl was full of light, and at the same time, there was a silent loneliness in her that he recognized. It was like looking in a distant mirror, and something inside him, which had been dormant, began to awaken. In the following days, he began to visit them frequently. He brought fresh bread in the morning, children's books on Saturdays. He helped with groceries. He told bedtime stories. Little by little, Sophia began to call him my visiting friend. Eleanor watched from afar. She knew his presence altered the routine, the girl, herself. But she also knew that Arthur had a right. And more than that Sophia needed something Eleanor, alone, could never offer. The other half of herself. Arthur, for his part, maintained an appearance of calm. But inside, he investigated. He discreetly hired a forensic analyst, asked him to cross-reference data from the last 5 years of the company. He visited old files, reviewed balance sheets. Everything pointed in the same direction. Mark had built an empire in the shadows, using Arthur as a facade. And there were records of financial movements made just after Eleanor's accident, transfers to offshore accounts. A pattern was emerging, but it wasn't enough yet. One afternoon, when Eleanor was working at the restaurant, Arthur stayed with Sophia. They were playing with Play-Doh when she suddenly stopped. "At school they said I'm weird," she said, not looking at him. "Who said that?" "Some kids. Why don't I have a daddy? And if my daddy really existed, he'd live with me." Arthur's heart clenched with an indescribable force. He wanted to hug her, tell her everything. But he couldn't. Not yet. "You're wonderful, Sophia. And sometimes, people say things they don't understand. But that doesn't mean they're right." She nodded silently. When Eleanor arrived, she found them both asleep on the sofa, Play-Doh scattered, and a new drawing in the girl's hands. It was a house, with 3 windows, 3 figures holding hands. That night, they sat at the table after Sophia fell asleep. Eleanor held a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the steam. The school called. She cried all day. "I know," Arthur said. "She told me." The silence between them was dense. Then he spoke. "I can't keep pretending I'm just a visitor." She looked up. She was tired, but firm. "Are you going to tell her?" "I think we need to tell her, but together." Eleanor nodded slowly. A tear rolled down her cheek. "She's your world now, Arthur. Don't disappoint her." "Never again," he replied, without hesitation. And at that instant, both knew the next conversation would change everything. Forever. How does Sophia's innocent question about her father impact Arthur's determination to reveal the truth? What is the significance of Arthur and Eleanor deciding to tell Sophia the truth together? Share your insights below. The truth revealed to Sophia. The apartment was silent, immersed in a quiet dimness, with the low lights of the living room reflecting golden tones on the beige walls. The night outside pulsed in silence, as if even the city respected the weight of that moment. Eleanor arranged a cushion on the sofa. Arthur cleared his throat, his heart beating so hard it seemed to reverberate in the room. Sophia was in her bedroom, playing with paper dolls she had drawn herself. Arthur slowly got up, walked to the slightly ajar door, gently knocked twice, and said, "Princess, can you come for a moment?" The girl appeared with slightly messy hair, holding a doll with a blue cape made from a napkin. She walked to the living room with carefree steps, sitting between the 2 adults with the naturalness of someone who still doesn't carry fear in her heart. "What's wrong?" she asked, swinging her feet as she played. Eleanor looked at Arthur. He nodded, swallowing his anxiety. "Sophia," he began, with a voice he had to pull from somewhere deep within. "We want to tell you something very important." The girl stopped swinging her feet. She looked at Eleanor, then at him. There was something in their tone of voice that made her pay attention. "Do you remember the day you told me about the kids at school? What did they say, that you didn't have a dad?" Sophia nodded, looking down. "That's not true," Arthur said, with a lump in his throat. "You have a dad, and it's me." Silence. The girl looked at him, as if waiting for the punchline of a joke. Then she turned to Eleanor, who only confirmed with a tender gesture. "Really?" she asked, in a small voice. Arthur took a deep breath. Really, I'm your dad, Sophia, and I'm here now. To stay, to protect you, to watch you grow, to be with you every day I can." Her eyes widened. She seemed to be trying to fit the pieces of an invisible puzzle together. "But why weren't you here before?" The question came out raw, direct, as only children know how to ask. Eleanor tensed, but Arthur gently touched his daughter's hand. "Because I didn't know you existed, and because your mom had to protect you from many bad things that happened. But now I know, and now nothing will keep me away from you." The girl looked at one, then the other. Her eyes began to fill. "Are you going to leave later? Like, just for today?" Arthur shook his head, holding back tears. "No, I'm going to keep coming. Always. And one day, if you want, I can pick you up from school, make you pancakes, even teach you how to ride a bike." He paused for a few seconds. Then, he leaned in and hugged his father. A shy, small hug, but one that contained the weight of an entire world. Arthur closed his eyes. The smell of her hair, the softness of her short arms around his neck, the warmth of her body, all of it hit him like a direct blow to the chest. A raw, new, non-negotiable love. Eleanor took a deep breath. Tears streamed discreetly as she watched the two embrace. Sophia slowly broke free and wiped her face. "Are you coming tomorrow?" "I'm coming. And the day after tomorrow, too. And after that?" "Do you promise?" "I promise," Arthur replied without hesitation, his voice broken. She smiled, and in that smile was the innocence that had resisted 5 years of absence. Eleanor took Sophia back to her room, lay with her until the girl fell asleep. When she returned to the living room, Arthur was still sitting on the sofa, his hands clasped, as if he was afraid to move and break the moment. "Thank you," he said. "She deserves to know. Even if the world is falling apart, she deserves a clean love." He looked at Eleanor with raw sincerity. "I want to be a real father, not just for her, also for me. I want to be present, participate, know the details, know her favorite color, what she dreams about, what scares her." Eleanor sat beside him. For an instant, neither spoke, until she, in a whisper, confessed, "I was so afraid you wouldn't want her." "Don't say that again." His voice was firmer now. "What I felt today has no name, and I'm not going to waste it." "And the rest?" she asked, without needing to say more. Arthur looked towards the window. The street reflections danced on the glass. "I'll resolve that, but without dragging you two into it. Not for now." She nodded. Both knew that the wounds were still open, that the past wouldn't disappear just because the truth had been told. But that night, a door opened, and for the first time in a long time, there was more than pain. There was possibility. There were bonds beginning to form with trembling but determined hands. And sometimes, that's what a family needs to be reborn. What is the most touching aspect of Sophia's reaction to learning the truth about her father? How does Arthur's renewed commitment to Eleanor and Sophia signify a complete shift in his priorities? Share your insights below. A family's foundation. Building anew. The following week, Arthur found himself in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie knot with uncharacteristic precision. His dark suit contrasted with the slight nervousness he felt. It wasn't a corporate event. It wasn't a conference in Geneva. It wasn't a diplomatic dinner. It was family day at Sophia's school, and he felt more exposed than on any stage he had ever occupied. On the car seat beside him was a bouquet of small, colorful flowers. Daisies, sunflowers, lavender, prepared by a neighborhood florist at his request. Something a child would choose for the teacher she loves. There was also a drawing he had made himself, with Eleanor's help, on a piece of cardboard. A small house, 3 figures holding hands, and above them, in crooked letters. Vance Ruiz family. At the apartment, Eleanor dressed Sophia with the same care of someone preparing for a farewell or a beginning. She brushed the girl's hair, braiding it with light ribbons. She adjusted the yellow dress with small lemon prints and then knelt in front of her. "Today you're going with your daddy," Sophia smiled, as if her entire world had reorganized itself inside. "Are you coming later?" "Yes, but this moment is yours too." When Arthur arrived, Eleanor was already waiting on the sidewalk. He got out of the car, his heart beating at a different rhythm, and seeing her holding his daughter's hand, he was overwhelmed by an irreversible tenderness. "You look beautiful," he told the girl. "And you look like a movie boss," she replied, amused. Eleanor looked at him a second longer than necessary. She said nothing, but her eyes said, "I trust you." On the way to school, Arthur drove slowly. Sophia talked about the other families, about a girl who had 2 moms, about a boy who would bring his uncle because his parents worked abroad. He listened attentively, storing each phrase as if they were rare jewels. At the school gate, a flurry of parents and children spread across the playground, decorated with balloons and handmade signs. Arthur got out of the car, tucked the bouquet under his arm, and extended his hand to his daughter. But she didn't take it. She hugged him, right there, in front of everyone. The classroom was full when they entered. The teacher, a woman with a sweet voice and firm posture, recognized him from the photo Sophia showed her classmates. "Mr. Vance, a pleasure." "Please, just Arthur today." He smiled, extending the bouquet. "This is from Sophia for you." The teacher blushed, moved by the gesture. Sophia ran to a group of children, but soon returned, pulling a classmate by the hand. "This is my daddy," she said, her chest puffed out. The boy looked at Arthur with some astonishment. "Really? He looks like an actor." "He's just my dad," Sophia replied with a laugh. The other children approached, some shy, others curious. The same girl who had said Sophia was weird now praised his tie. A boy asked to see the ring on his finger. Arthur responded to everyone with a delicacy that seemed natural, but was built from years when he didn't know how to love without losing control. During the presentation, each child climbed onto an improvised stool and said something about their family. When it was Sophia's turn, she went up hand in hand with her father. "I have a mommy who cooks like storybook fairies, and a daddy who came back to me when I thought he didn't exist." The room fell silent. Arthur knelt beside her, his eyes full of tears. "Sophia is the best part of me." No one moved for a few seconds. Then, applause. Timid at first, then outer. The teacher smiled. Some parents too. But what mattered was there, in the eyes of the girl who looked at him with more pride than he had ever received from shareholders or awards. At the end of the event, as the children ran through the playground, Arthur sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. Eleanor slowly approached, like someone respecting the space he had conquered. "It was beautiful," she said. "It was the best day of my life," he replied, without irony. She nodded. Then she was silent for a moment. "It's not easy to trust again, I know, but give me time. Not to convince you, just to prove it to you. She already loves you." Eleanor said it like someone acknowledging something inevitable. Arthur looked at her, unhurried. "And you?" Eleanor looked away, taking a deep breath. "I still have a lot to heal." "Then let me help you." She smiled, briefly, but sincerely. That day, Arthur didn't go back to the office. He took Sophia for ice cream. Then they went to the neighborhood bookstore to choose a new book. At the end of the afternoon, she fell asleep in the back seat of the car, hugging a new doll. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was wasting time. He felt like he was living. What is the significance of the drawing Sophia brings to school, and how does it symbolize the new family they are building? How does Arthur's participation in Family Day and Sophia's presentation affirm his transformation into a loving and present father? Share your insights. Saturday mornings began to taste of pancakes with strawberries and calmly brewed coffee. The kitchen radio played softly, always some old station with boleros and bossa nova, while Arthur, still in his apron, helped Sophia crack eggs and measure flour. Eleanor watched from the doorway, a cup in her hands, trying not to let herself be seduced by the scene, but failing day after day. There was a clumsy tenderness in Arthur, something that only appeared when he was with his daughter. As if, by her side, he ceased to be the man the world knew and became, at last, just a father. He knelt on the rug to play with puppets, watched the same cartoon episodes repeatedly, laughed at her jokes, even when they made no sense, and Eleanor saw it all. With the eyes of someone who knew Arthur from the inside, she knew his traumas, his rigidity, his difficulty in yielding. That's why the change was more than moving. It was terrifying. She wanted to believe, but fear was stubborn. Days passed with a new rhythm. Arthur appeared on Friday nights with old movies and onion-free pizza, Sophia's favorite flavor. On Sunday afternoons, he left her with kisses on her head and promises of, "See you soon." Never goodbye. Never again. It was on one of those quiet afternoons, after a walk in the park, that he sat with Eleanor on the balcony, while Sophia slept, exhausted, with sand-dirty feet and a banana leaf tangled in her hair. "I want to show you something," Arthur said, taking an envelope from his pocket. Eleanor looked at him with distrust, but took it. Inside was a printed proposal with the golden letterhead of the Blackwood Plaza Hotel. "An offer?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "An invitation to be the new head chef of the hotel restaurant. Total freedom, no owner's meddling. It's yours, from scratch. You choose the team, the menu, everything." She took a moment to respond. The idea seemed too good to be true. "Why now? Because you're the best chef I know, and because it's time the world knew it too? Or because you want to have your daughter closer?" He smiled, not denying it. Also, Eleanor stood up, went to the balcony railing, and stood looking at the empty street for a while. "What if it doesn't work? Then we start over. Again. As many times as it takes. And what if I leave later? I won't stop you, but I'll help you pack." She looked at him over her shoulder. For the first time, there was more light than shadow in that gaze. "You still trust too much, and you distrust too much." She smiled weakly, but she smiled. At the end of the month, they closed the apartment. Eleanor and Sophia moved to London. Not to the hotel. Eleanor insisted on renting a small flat a few blocks away. She wanted to maintain some independence, some control. Arthur understood, and he didn't argue. The restaurant was renovated. Eleanor designed the menu by hand during long nights, with Arthur tasting each dish and Sophia scribbling hearts on the edges of the pages. The team was carefully chosen, young chefs hungry for truth, not fame. In a short time, reservations were fully booked for weeks. Glowing reviews, magazine articles, a star that was beginning to shine under another name. But beyond the success, something else grew there. Intimacy. Arthur and Eleanor were sharing the same space again. Not like before, as if they had never been a couple. Now, they were two adults with visible scars, trying to sow something new without erasing the past. Sometimes they argued over trifles, the seasoning of a soup, the school schedule, the flowers in the restaurant reception. Sometimes they laughed late into the night, with cheap wine and memories of a time when everything was a dream. And there were nights when they sat in silence, the three of them, with Sophia in the middle, as if nothing else existed but that small, warm room. It was a new stage, and perhaps, for the first time in years, no one there was running. How does Arthur's unexpected offer of the hotel restaurant to Eleanor, and her conditions for accepting, highlight their evolving relationship based on mutual respect and shared purpose? What is the significance of Eleanor's choice to rent a separate flat, and how does it reflect her journey towards independence and trust? Share your insights. Time, with its silent way of correcting what seemed irrecoverable, passed. Not like a hurricane, but like a thread of wind that, little by little, dries the soaked earth, reveals the path, and makes something new grow among the old ruins. Eleanor and Arthur did not become the couple they were. It wasn't possible. They were no longer the same. Those two, young, in love, still immature before the world, remained frozen in a memory that now seemed too distant to touch. But something different was born in its place, a love that no longer depended on promises or idealizations. It was made of routine, care, and a silent pact not to abandon each other. On nights when the restaurant closed earlier, Eleanor would rest her feet on Arthur's lap and lean her head on his shoulder. Sometimes they would stay like that, in silence, watching old movies. Other times, they would talk about life with Sophia, about new dishes on the menu, about small daily victories. The bed that once seemed too big for one person was now a shared territory for three. Laughter, children's books, and sleepy smiles. Eleanor, little by little, stopped looking at Arthur as someone who had hurt her. She began to see him as the man who stayed, even though he was wounded. And that realization disarmed all resistance. One night, while having dinner at home, Eleanor set the table as if it were any ordinary night. A light blue tablecloth, lit candles, deep bowls of caramelized onion soup. Sophia read a book nearby, doodling distractedly with colored pencils. Arthur got up without warning. He went to the living room cabinet and came back with a small box. "Are you going to do this now?" Eleanor asked, laughing, a little bewildered. There's no perfect moment to rebuild something that stood when everything said it was impossible, he said. He opened the box. Inside, a simple ring. Opaque gold, with a thin line carved into it, like a scar. "I don't want a proposal out of impulse," he said, "nor out of nostalgia for what we were, but for what we are now. For the courage we had to keep going. For her," he pointed to Sophia, "and for us." Sophia looked at her mother, anxious. "Are you going to marry him?" Eleanor hesitated. She touched the ring as one would touch an old diary page. She looked at Arthur, and then at her daughter. The silence was brief, but heavy. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "But now, with our feet on the ground, and our eyes wide open." Arthur smiled. He placed the ring on her finger with hands that trembled discreetly. Sophia clapped, ran to them, and hugged both at the same time. Life didn't change suddenly, but the axis did. What is the symbolism of the ring that Arthur proposes with, and how does it represent a new beginning, distinct from their past? How does Sophia's presence influence Eleanor's decision to accept Arthur's proposal? Share your insights. 3 years later, they married again. The ceremony was in a discreet garden, surrounded by hanging lights among trees, and a long table with wildflowers and dishes prepared by Eleanor's own team. Sophia entered with the rings, barefoot, wearing a crown of leaves she had braided herself with her grandmother. The guests were few, the essential ones, real friends, the ones who stayed, There was no pomp, no magazine photographer, just people who knew where they came from and what it cost to get there. Eleanor was now known as one of the most innovative chefs in contemporary gastronomy in London. She was sought after for interviews, but refused most. She preferred to be in the kitchen, sweating, leading her team with authority and humor. Clients adored her, and not just for the food, but for the aura of truth she conveyed. Arthur continued to lead the Vance empire, but with a more humane, more sober management. Sophia's presence in his life had shaped him, and he accepted that with gratitude. The girl grew with sparkle in her eyes, precocious wisdom, and an unusual talent for drawing. She spent afternoons drawing people with big, expressive eyes. Sometimes, she would show her drawings to her parents and say, "This is what you feel when you think you're fine, but you still haven't forgiven." It was impossible not to laugh. And then, to think, in this new life, there was no perfection. But there was presence, there was contact, listening, a place to return to. And when Eleanor rested her head on Arthur's chest, on the most tired nights, it wasn't to escape the world. It was to remember that despite everything, there was someone there who didn't give up, who chose to stay, who loved with maturity, without haste, without empty promises, but with enough depth to last. But the past, though distant, never stopped casting shadows. Arthur knew it, and even in the most genuine moments of peace, a part of him remained awake, a part that remembered the veiled threat, the lost years, the fake accident, and above all, Mark. It wasn't revenge that moved him. It was justice. It was the need to close the cycle with dignity, with the truth. Finally, being spoken aloud, so that his daughter could grow up without the ghosts that surrounded her mother's childhood. Therefore, silently, he reopened the files. The old spreadsheets, the contracts, the messages that seemed harmless at first glance, but took on new meaning in the light of suspicion. He hired a private audit, off the company's radar. He installed discrete trackers on parallel accounts and accessed folders that only he, its founder, had authorization to open. And there it was. Little by little, the truth was woven with cruel precision. There were encrypted emails between Mark and Shell consultants, contracts signed with non-existent companies, triangulated transfers between offshore accounts in tax havens, and most seriously, documents signed by Arthur that he had never seen. Forged. Strategically dated during the days leading up to Eleanor's accident. The moment of revelation brought no screams, no outbursts. There was a kind of pain that only the deeply betrayed know, one that doesn't ask for revenge, but demands redemption. He went to Eleanor one Wednesday morning as she cut basil on the restaurant counter. "I need you to see this." She read the papers without speaking. Page by page, her hands began to tremble when she saw her name indirectly cited in internal company communications, like the source or the risk. "They knew I knew," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "From the beginning." Arthur nodded. "And they knew I trusted him, that I would defend him without hesitation." "Are you going to expose all this?" "It's already in motion." She looked at him for a long moment. There was no resentment in her gaze. There was something deeper. Respect. Relief. "And what if the media turns against you?" "I'll bear it. I can't keep pretending I don't know, that I didn't see, that I didn't participate by omission." Days later, he handed all the material over to the prosecutor's office. He made no fuss. He didn't call the press. He simply handed it over and waited. Mark was arrested a week later in a discreet operation. He tried to claim innocence, conspiracy, bad faith, but the evidence was solid, clear, irrefutable. His image fell like a house of cards. The headlines spread rapidly. Corporate betrayal. Vance Empire under internal attack. Businessman exposes fraud within his own company. Arthur gave a single statement. Brief. To the point. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. But my biggest mistake was not looking more closely. Now, I look, and I don't look away. He didn't feel proud. There was no relief. There was shame. For having been an unwitting accomplice. For having doubted Eleanor, even if only for seconds. For having left his own wife at the mercy of a dirty network without realizing it. But when he arrived home, he found Sophia painting with watercolors on the balcony. Seeing him, she ran towards him with a drawing in her hands. It's us, she said. You, Mommy, and me. But now there's light around us. He knelt. Why light? Because now everything is clear. And at that instant, Arthur understood that justice wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about giving truth the space it always deserved, and about protecting, with every decision, what finally blossomed after the darkness. Because true love can be silenced, but never destroyed. It always returns. It always returns. When there is courage to listen and to stay.